He began doing these water-based stunts and filming himself in the process. Things like surfing in storms, or leaping off of buildings into fairly shallow water, or diving to dangerous depths on a breath hold. He decided this was going to be his career. By his early 20s, he had won major awards with National Geographic and the Sunday Times. A very strong whirlpool would appear a few times a year in a harbor that was right near his childhood home. And so just like in your bathtub, if you pull the plug when it's full, you'll see a whirlpool form as the water is sucked down the drain. The same thing would happen at this quay wall as all this water is being forced down and sucked through this pipe. It was so dangerous. There were caution signs, but in his mid-20s, Jacob ignored those signs. He ran to his friend David's house and he asked him to, hey, come down to the harbor and film me inside of this whirlpool. And so by the time David got his stuff together and made it to the quay wall, he looked down and he saw Jacob was already in the whirlpool swirling around. David also noticed that Jacob was wearing a rubber horsehead mask, and he told David the reason he was doing it is because it would be more eye-catching on YouTube. So David leaned over the wall and began filming Jacob as he swirled around this whirlpool in his horse mask making neighing sounds. But you could see the pull of the whirlpool was very strong, because even with flippers on, Jacob really struggled to swim away from this whirlpool. He was actually pretty scared of this whirlpool. It's definitely the strongest one he had been in over at this quay wall. And David would say, yeah, I can tell from up here, that one's really strong. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, David and Jacob kind of joked back and forth about the strength of the whirlpool, and Jacob would put his mask back down and swirl around inside of the whirlpool, then get out again. And then towards the end of the video, Jacob yells up to David that he only has one more thing in mind that he wants to do with the whirlpool. He wants to dive down below and film it from underneath. And so he asks David to hand down his camera. David hands it down, and you see Jacob adjusting his camera, and then he dives below the surface to begin filming this whirlpool. And so David's up on the top watching Jacob, and he's very familiar with Jacob. He knows he does things like this. He knows he has a great breath hold. But after a couple of minutes, when he doesn't reemerge, David gets scared and starts yelling for him. And when he still doesn't come up, David turns and runs to the other side of the quay wall and looks over that railing towards the pool side, and he can see the water is still rushing into the pool, and there's no sign of Jacob. And so he ran back and forth a couple of times and he didn't see Jacob until finally he went back to the pool side and he saw Jacob down below. He was lying face down in the water. So David ran down and waded out to him, but it was already too late. Jacob had drowned. The reason Jacob was able to swirl around at the top of this whirlpool and not get pulled under is because he had a wetsuit on, and wetsuits are buoyant. But as you go underneath the water, the deeper you go, the water pressure pushes against your wetsuit and it reduces the overall buoyancy of your wetsuit. And so when Jacob dove down into this whirlpool, the pressure pushed against his suit, he lost his buoyancy, and then he got caught up in the current of this very strong whirlpool, and he was pulled slowly down to the bottom. And so he probably fought as much as he could to try to get out of there, but he couldn't, and eventually was forced into that tunnel underneath the quay wall, and he was under there until he drowned, and then he was eventually spit out the other side. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.